Hi, welcome to my second lecture on the Sicilian defense. The Sicilian defense starts out by e4, c5. Last time I discussed the most popular move, or white's second move, is knight to f3, which is called the open defense. And the other two most played moves are knight to c3, which is called the closed defense, and c3, which is called Alapin's variation. And in this lecture, I'm going to cover the closed defense and Alapin's variation. I'm going to then cover there's a whole multitude of opening defense variations. I won't cover them all, but just the probably the most popular or basic ones. So let's cover the closed defense, which is knight to c3. So, what is the purpose of knight to c3? Well, here white plans to basically dominate the light squares, or control the light colored squares, and give black control of the dark colored squares. And then along with basic strategy is that white will then attack king side, and of course probably black will attack queen side. Okay, so basically it's sort of going to close up the position. White's going to control white, black's going to control black. Okay, so let's continue. So black will play knight to c3, obviously a developing move which helps control the black squares. And then white's third move, g3. Now just to back up a move, if white decides to play, knight to f3, and then black plays some of the other moves which we'll get to in the future lectures, like d6, e6, things like this, we actually turn into an open game, and this occurs like half the time when people start by playing, which almost looks like a closed defense, it actually turns into an open defense. So this is sort of the true open defense, is g3, planning to fettuccino the bishop, which is just bringing the bishop, moving this pawn up and bringing this bishop over. That way it controls, this way the bishop will lie along this line. And then black's going to do the same thing. So white will play bishop to g2, black will play bishop to g7, white will play d3, black will play d6. Now I covered these real quickly, but just to see how they're covering their basic strategy of white here is controlling the dark or the light squares in the center, are helping control the light squares. So these are definitely the two white central squares. Okay, and then black, as you can tell, is controlling the dark colored squares, even with the bishop, with the knight. Okay, and white is doing the same thing. It has this pawn here controlling the white center square. The knight's helping to control these two squares, and the bishop is also influencing this square, or these squares, these light colored squares. So the basic strategy. Now let's continue with some of the additional moves. Black or white plays bishop to e3. Just to let you know, there's many different variations. This is not the only way to play this. White could also play f4, sort of rolling, starting to push some of these pawns forward. Bishop develops and then helps to eye this d4 square. And then the white will play e6, helping to control some of these light squares. Also giving some room for the bishop to develop. Queen to d2, because white plans to play the knight the knight on g to e2. That way it can advance the f pawn. Or if white were to play this, Like I said, white usually likes to roll this f pawn if the knight rigger can really push the pawn up. Black's going to play rook to b8, which helps support this pawn. This bishop here looks along this diagonal, and let's say if the bishop were to move and the knight were to move, it would be sort of hanging there for free, but actually black plans to advance that pawn. So one of the reasons is now black is going to move that pawn up and it'll be supported. So white plays knight to g2. Black plays knight to d4. White castles, and now black pushes up that b pawn. So as you can tell, just look at the basic strategy that I talked about: the closed defense, black controlling black, white controlling white, and then the overall theme of white hasn't really gotten a kingside attack going, but look how black is already starting to attack along the queen's side. Okay. Now let's back up the position and cover the Alapin's variation. So instead of playing knight to c3, we're just going to play pawn to c3. And what does this move accomplish? Well, here white plans on pushing the d4 pawn and then setting up what they call an ideal pawn center, where it'd be left with two pawns sort of abreast in the center, hoping to exert maximum control over the center. But black's best weapon is a central counterattack, and that's what happens. So after this c3, black plays d5, and now basically white's going to have to capture, and then now the queen's going to capture. And one of the nice things about this is that normally when this queen captures, white can normally play like the knight to here, then sort of attacking the queen. But it doesn't have that option anymore. This queen can't really be harassed. So now white will play d4. Notice how white's plan to having ideal pawn centers sort of evaporated. Maybe this is why you don't see this variation too much. Black's going to play knight to f6, developing the knight, also having influence over the white squares. And then white will play knight to f3, helping control the dark squares and also supporting the pawn, any type of recapturing business on d4. Black plays e6. Sometimes black will play knight to c6, and actually on the next move play e6. So these moves are somewhat sort of exchange them around. Usually now white will play bishop to e2. If you don't know, you're thinking, well, why didn't white just capture last move? Well, then the queen would come down and capture. Then the white would be forced to recapture the king, and white would lose the right to castle, and then black could quickly castle and then attack the king in the center. So here white develops the bishop, allowing the castle, and also theoretically white can now capture the pawn, but I don't know if that would be a good idea since the bishop could recapture. And then black could start to maybe attack this pawn. Since the bishop would be focused here, the knight could come in and attack. Maybe. I don't know if this would really work, but black could recapture with development of the bishop. So white just played bishop to e2, and then knight to c6, like I mentioned before. White castles, and now black trades off this pawn sort of its original idea. White recaptures best with the pawn, and actually now white has a isolated queen's pawn. And I'm going to stop the analysis there and just sort of say that is the basics of the closed defense and the Alapin's variation. I'll continue now.